Hello, everyone. How's your day going? Can you hear me? Okay, good. Let me move this a little closer. Good, good, good. Finished a midterm. Oh my goodness, I know. We had our midterm kind of early, probably, but I know this is the time that everyone's having their first midterms, right? That always annoyed me how some classes had two midterms. I'm like, there can't be two middles of the term. There has to be one middle of the term, right? And midterm is not technically until this course ends. The last day of this course is the middle of the term. All right, let me get rid of this. Okay, yeah, I think we have almost everyone anyways. Well, good. I'm glad everyone's doing well. Let me share my PowerPoint here. Or let me share my screen. Here we go. All right, so we are in week 6, and we are going to be talking about contemporary art, in particular, the relationship between contemporary art and tradition. So we're going to be talking about Sadoho, and we're going to be talking about Ipur. And luckily, everyone seemed really interested in them. So I just want to update you on remaining assignments. So if you saw the announcement yesterday, did people receive a notification about that? I updated our original syllabus to reflect the fact that we have the extra credit assignment during week 8. So that should be available to you on Canvas. And if, the only difference is that it includes a week 8 instead of just the week 7. So you really don't need to worry about it too much if you're like, okay, week 8, I know that it's a thing. But really I'm required and really should be sorry, I'm starting a timer so I can follow it. To keep you updated with an updated syllabus. So we don't really have that many assignments left. But nonetheless, I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So we're going to have a plenary response today, which is going to be, or that'll be due on Friday, sorry. And it'll be like the plenary responses that you did for about North Korean art and Minjung art. And then next week, you just have a blog post that's due before class, which is on October 4th. And it is a double point blog post. So you really should, if you're one of those people who's a little bit behind on points, this is a good way to get your points up. There's not going to be an after class assignment next week because originally the after class assignment was the final, but because we're switching the final to week 8, you don't really, I could have added another assignment, but that wasn't in the original syllabus anyway, so I'm just not going to worry about it. So week 8 is going to be the final exam. So that's going to start on Monday, October the 9th. And at midnight, the final exam is going to become open on Canvas. And it's the same format as the midterm. And you'll have to submit it on Canvas by October 13th, which is, oh, thank you, Sam. Yeah, I'll fix that, which is it'll be due 11:59 p.m. Yeah, on Canvas right now, it should say that it's October 2nd and 6th. That's the original date. I need to switch it to the new date. Thank you for letting me know. So yeah, you'll have the 5 days. I'll be around that whole week. If you have questions, you can ask me. And then as a reminder, and next week I'll do a head count for who's planning on attending these museum sessions, but we'll have on that Tuesday, October the 10th, and Friday, October the 13th, we will have at 10:30 a.m. we'll have a session at the Spencer Museum that you're welcome to participate in for the extra credit assignment. Please know that Friday, October 13th is the last day that I can accept any late assignments for this course. After October 13th, this course is officially over, and your final grades for it are actually due the next week. So you'll have your final grade and everything posted well before the end of the semester. Okay, are there any questions about that? Or questions about the extra credit? Okay, good. So, I believe that the course evaluations for this course are going to open on October 8th, which is 2 weeks from now, but usually in this week, that's when they open for the full semester. So keep a lookout for that. Please do your course evaluations. Unfortunately, I'm not going to give you time during our live session to do them, but if you remember to do it, I would appreciate it. We really do use that feedback that students give us. It's how I improve the course. It's how Professor Stiller improves her courses. It's how all of us improve them. So we really, positives and negatives are both welcome. All right. So attendance question. So let's start talking about this concept here, contemporary. So what do you think contemporary means as opposed to modern? So this course is called Modern Korean Art and Culture, but we also have this other term which gets mixed up with it. So what do you think? What might be the difference between the two? Why do we have two different words like this? All right, let's see here. So modern, how are you saying modern goes back further than contemporary? Good, which defines art being produced at the current moment. I think that is a really great way to explain it. Yeah, contemporary is definitely very current, like right now or at the same time. Whereas modern can go back even further. Yeah. Okay, modern reflects more of a style. Yeah, we do have a tendency to think of modern art as following specific kinds of styles, right? That is true. And contemporary, because it's contemporary at the moment, we might not think of it that way, but maybe in the future, when we look back in retrospect, we might think of it in a similar vein, right? Yeah, good. So modern is like newer than is newer, but it's not as new as contemporary. That's good. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Contemporary is in our present, modern a little more in the past. Good. Yes, good. Stuff happening now. Yeah. Current day. Yeah, modern is more of like a period as well. The way we talk about history, modern history, more talk about as like the period. But we do have the idea of modern art, right? Which is not necessarily. So then the question becomes, like we're all saying, so we I think we're all on the same page here. Yeah, here we go. David Porter saying contemporary is closer to the present. Modern is within the last 100-ish years. So how do we define when modern is versus when contemporary is, and when they begin and end? How do we define that? What do you think? Good, yes. Yeah, so there's definitely differences between the art that we usually label modern as versus contemporary. Yeah, exactly. And we're going to talk about that a lot. Yeah, good. Okay, good. Katie says the start of industrialization. Absolutely. So modern has to do with this idea of industrialization, right? So the becoming of a certain form of technology, right? Is kind of defines modern. And then, okay, so maybe new trends starting, right? Ooh, here we go. Alex brought out the good word here, globalization. Yeah, globalization. What, thinking about a little bit to what we've talked about in this course, what role does globalization play in modern and contemporary? What is kind of the relationship between that? Is globalization a part of being modern or being contemporary? Or what do you think? Because global is very important here, right? So contemporary does by definition mean like of the moment, but as you can see, we're talking about contemporary art that was actually the 1990s until present is when a lot of people define it. And so it might be difficult to think of 1990s as contemporary, but people usually use it to talk about art history when artists from that time frame are still living, or a lot of them are still living. Modern is definitely related to the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of globalization, so being more involved. But there's not really an easy way to define when modern ends and contemporary begins. Because even think about, we typically think of modern art as the late 19th and the early 20th century, but there are still people born during World War II, maybe even slightly before World War II, right, who are still alive today, right? So it becomes kind of difficult, but this is a question that it can't really be answered, but it's one you might want to think about because you're going to see both of these terms kind of thrown around, honestly, without ever being defined. So then, if that's contemporary and modern, what do we think is tradition as opposed to modern and contemporary? What is tradition? What are some things about tradition? And there's a lot to unpack with that term, right? Good. Yes. Tanya says repeated ideas or practices that are typically linked with people's culture. Yes, so repetition. So something that continuously is done, right? It's done over and over again. Good. Passed down through the generations, right? Exactly. So it starts with ancestors and then it continues throughout, right? People later on who are related in some way will continue to do that within a particular community. Yes. Yes, draws upon history of a collective. Good. I love that we're thinking about collective. Yeah, traditions are usually held by groups of people, right? Good. They go on for a long time. Yes, they can go on for a long time. So then when we say traditional, like what Kevin is saying here, we tend to refer to something that's even further in the past than modern or contemporary, right? Good. Done in the past. Here we go, Lauren. Done in the past and continuing into the future. Yes, we think of tradition as something that began very long ago and continues to be done today, right? Good. Yes. So, yeah, all of this has to do with time, right? It's the way we're thinking about time and trying to divide up time and how things change over time, right? So when do we know that something is a tradition? When do we call something a tradition? What do you think? Do people do you think that people in the past when they started doing things said, this is what we want this to be our people's tradition? Do you think that's how it works? Or is there something else going on? Okay, so when it's been repeated, good. After it's passed through the generations, right? After it has been passed. So it's not the people who first do it, right? But the people later, when they look back, they call it a tradition. Exactly. When society agrees and accepts it. Yeah, right. Society presently. The second generation. It could be the second. It could be even later than the second. Good. Right. Repeated. Exactly. So the reason so what we want to kind of think about here is tradition, not necessarily as something that, it is something that is related to the past, something that, and it is sometimes or often something people did in the past, but this idea of tradition is actually something that we in the present are concerned with, right? It's something that we label whatever the practice is as tradition, right? And, you know, I don't just mean like us right now, but people recently or people who are of our time, who are contemporaneous, right? We look back at these things and we say, oh, because it's been passed down through the generations, therefore it's a tradition, right? Does that make sense? So we want to think about that because that kind of blurs our understanding of the way in the present we think about the past, right? And the way that people in the past thought about themselves. Okay, so let's do some, let's get to the content of Horlick's book chapter, which everyone seemed pretty good. I'm sorry, I should have warned you this was very long. I usually do on week 6, I tell everyone to remember, or week 5, this is a really long chapter and it's got a lot of different information in it. So what are the ways that, we talked about this in our blog post, let's just review really quickly. What are the ways that 21st century art after the 90s is similar and different to the art we've talked about earlier in Korea in the 20th century? So Minjung art, North Korean art during Japanese colonial period. What are some similarities and differences? We had a lot in our blog posts. Yes, Tabitha. So, and I think some of us got this nuance that Horlick was trying to get at, but some of us didn't. So politics, the way that art relates to politics post 1990s is different from before, right? So art is still political and makes political comments in the 1990s in contemporary art. But what Horlick is saying is that unlike earlier, art was not related to specific political movements, right? So specifically Minjung art is related or connected to the Minjung political movement, right? But you don't have that kind of connection between art and politics after democracy, after Minjung, basically, after democracy's been achieved, right? So it's not that the art isn't political or that it doesn't concern itself with politics, but it's just not related to specific movements, right, or policies. Good. And then individualism versus collectivism. Yeah. You definitely, I think individualism is very pronounced in a lot of the artworks that we look at in contemporary art. But, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't a part of art earlier. But definitely when you think about this art compared to Minjung art or compared to North Korean art, it's very individualist, right? We tend to think of it as like the artist and what they want to express, right? And media, yes, media are very diverse during the time, right? Or during now, much more diverse than earlier, or at least that's what Horlick is saying. We're going to problematize that a little bit. Yeah, very good. Let's see. Yes, and abroad, a lot more artists are going abroad now. They were going abroad in the 70s and 80s, but after the 90s, it's almost a given that a student who's studying art and wants to be an artist who's from South Korea is going to go to some other country to study for a little while. It's almost a given. Good. So, basically what we see here is the transition of Korea after democracy to from the producer, right? So thinking back to Minjung, everything in the 60s and 70s, which is what prompted Minjung, was about making Korea this export economy, right? And now what we see happen in the 90s is they shift to more of a consumption, an economy based on consumption. They have a strong middle class who has a lot of disposable income. So we see a lot more consumption start to happen and define the culture of South Korea. And then what is the 386 generation? So she uses this term. So it means that they were, wait, hold on. They were in their 30s during the 80s, and they were born in the 60s. I believe that's or they were in their 30s during the 90s, of age in the 80s, and they were born in the 60s. Sorry, they transitioned from. Oh, yes, you're right. Oh, this slide is wrong. I never realized this was wrong. Thank you, Olivia. I'll write that down too. Yeah, they went from producer to consumer, right? So they moved from producing economically to being consumers of culture, right? Sorry, does that make more sense? Especially when you're thinking about Minjung? Yes, okay. Yeah, think about, we go from production economy to consumption economy. So it means that they were in their 30s in the 90s. They partook in the Minjung movement of the 80s, and they were born in the 60s. That's what this 386 or Samparyuk, it's called Samparyuksere in Korean. You'll see it often, but she never explained what that meant. So I wanted to make sure you know. You don't really need to know that, but it's just to clarify. Good. And then what were some of the artworks that we liked the best? Again, a lot of you shared this already in the blog, or everyone shared this already in the blog. But let's see how diverse our interests were. Yes, Ellie, I saw that. Yes, I like the Evergreen Tower. Not many people pay much attention to it, but I really like. Oh, yes. So I got to see Yellow Scream, or Yellow, what did I call it? Yellow Scream. When I was in Seoul, actually, I got to see the painting, and the video you can just look up on YouTube. It's on YouTube. And you can watch it. So it's very cool. It's actually one of my favorite artworks of all time, probably. It's very cool. Yes, the super flower. I love that too. Choi Jung Hwa, yes, super flower. And the broken glass pieces, yes, for sure. Yeah, hanging textiles, yes. We're going to talk about Sodoho today, luckily. Unfortunately, we don't get to talk about all of these different artists, but you'll get to talk about whoever you want for your plenary response, so you'll get to do it a little bit more. Yes, Two Brothers in the Dome. Yeah, exactly. The brothers meet, when two brothers meet. Is that what it's called, I think? Yeah. The fish, yes, Iburu's oh my gosh, I just forgot what it's called. Majestic Splendor. Oh, I love that one too. Yes, good. All right, so there's a couple. So the argument and assumptions in Charlotte Horlick's chapter, let's look at those. So she basically assumes that because after democracy is what led to an age of pluralism, right? So cultural consumption, which leads to these various art forms happening. And the assumption is that how can dictatorial regimes have a pluralistic art scene, right? So like in class even, we really only talked about Minjung art, right, prior to this. So we didn't really talk about art in the 50s, 60s, and 70s too much. But do you think that Minjung art was the only kind of art that was happening even in the 1980s? And I don't think we got to, we usually talk about this when we talk about Minjung art, but since we didn't have a meeting, we didn't get to, but there's abstract painting Tansekwa, or which is monochrome painting. That was big in the 70s. Do you think that like something like Minjung art was the only kind of artistic expression during the 1980s in South Korea? What do you think? I mean, yeah, the answer is obviously no, right? It's what we tend to focus on in art history, but that's not necessarily the whole truth, right? Yeah, so what we're getting to here is there's this canon of post-war Korean art, or post-Korean War art, right? What is a canon? Have we asked this? I think we've asked this question before, maybe. What is a canon of, when I say a canon of art, the art historical canon, what am I referring to? Universal, well, we tend to think of it as universal. Good, yes, Ellie, thank you, my art history major. Yes, art that is taught and discussed. Yeah, it's the set of art that we, for whatever reason, have decided this is the art that defines this period, right? And so like Amelia says here, dominant narrative, it's the dominant narrative. Right, exactly. Or established conventions. That's a good way to put it too, Elizabeth, right? So it's just things that are, it's a narrative about the way art or history has developed over time and changed over time that we continually tell, right? But the canon is its own narrative, right? And so when we talk about Korean art, especially after the Korean War, we tend to focus on a couple of things, one of which is primarily painting. So painting is huge. So there's the abstract painting. These are cases of monochrome painting. And yeah, and here's that as well, monochrome painting. And then we talk about Minjung art. This is what another monochrome painting looks like here, which we didn't get to learn about, unfortunately, but it exists. But there's always going to be stuff outside of the canon, right? Because people who are writing art history or writing history just aren't talking about it. And so there actually is things like performance art in Korea as early as the late 1950s, and things that are more experimental art with media that are quote unquote unconventional, right? But it's just not something that people really have talked about too much. So that's why this assumption that Horlick is making, we want to remember it's based on the canon, not necessarily the whole picture of all the art that was going on at the time. Does that make sense? So although it is true that contemporary art definitely is very diverse, it's not necessarily that it's unprecedented. These types of art that are being made do have some precedents earlier, and we just don't talk about them as much. All right, so that's my soapbox, I guess. So let's talk about Ipur and Sadoho. This is more fun. So Ipur, sorry for your suffering. So what is performance art? And what's difficult to about understanding or studying performance art? Performance art is something that people debate whether it belongs to visual art or it belongs to something else as well. So what do you think? If I asked you to define performance art, what are some things you would say about it? And several have said we really like this artwork, so a lot of art is produced at once. Performance art can sometimes be one time, but it can be reproduced in different instances. Each time it will be a little bit different. Good, yes. The artist is interacting directly with the audience, presenting to the audience what it is, what the art is. Very important here. So there's a direct, usually there's a direct connection being made between the artist and the audience in performance art. Absolutely. Not necessarily the art of, well, okay. Yeah, and so the actual way or the actual experience of viewing the art is important to it, not just the art itself. Very good. Good, here we go. This is good. Actions, what Katie says here, executed in actions. Yes, so it's an active form of art, right? So it's done in front of an audience. It has a connection with that audience. The audience viewing it is an integral part of the work itself. And the artist is doing something. The artist is doing something, right? And they can be doing they can be doing anything, really. But they're doing something good. And there's an element of ephemerality. Yes, so it's ephemeral. That means it will disappear at some point. It will go away. Once the performance is done, the performance art piece is over. The art is done, kind of, right? There is an afterlife, but it's over, right? Yes, the artist's physical self. Yes, exactly. So the artist is more interested in the way that they are physically a part of this art, right? Or physically doing this art. Yes, very good. Okay, so Ellie is touching on, I don't know if Ellie meant to do this, but is touching on the issue with studying or understanding performance art. Performance art can't be, I like this, contained. It can't be contained in an exhibition. Like you can't go necessarily see it at a museum. Unless it's planned to be done in the museum, you probably can't go see it there. Or a photo, yes. So the afterlife of the performance art piece is lived or relived through photography, through the recording of the performance, right? So you only get to experience the performance itself maybe once, but then the way we have to understand and study it is through these tangential ways of it being recorded, right? So that can be difficult because it can skew our way of seeing what's going on because we only have these individually captured moments. Good. There we go. Here we go. Theatrical. Yes. So performance art is sometimes thought of as theater rather than visual art, but it's kind of both. Yeah, exactly. And very experienced, actions, body, good. Yes, very good. So yeah, good. So do we kind of get what's going on with this idea of performance art? So it's the artist doing something, they have an audience or they want an audience. Usually there's a direct connection and it's visual and theatrical and it's studied or understood through it, the way it was recorded. So let's talk about Sorry for Your Suffering. So here's Ipur, and she's put on something interesting here. So when we describe the photograph, we want to pay attention to a lot of the similar things that we normally pay attention to, but we also want to ask a little bit more of these questions about what is being done, what is doing, what is happening. So where is Lee? What is Lee doing? Who else is there and what are they doing? Let's start with those things. What do we think? How would you describe what's going on in this scene here in the photograph? Okay, so it's a busy street. Good. So Lee is on a busy street. She's near a traffic stop in a city. Good. A busy street corner. Good. Good. And then the other people, they appear to be businessmen. Well, what makes you say that they're businessmen? Oh, there we go. Yeah, Olivia says it. In suits. They're in a suit. They're attire. Yes, good. And they have briefcases. Yes, they do have briefcases. Yes, good. So what is Lee doing? Yes, very good, Alex. Yeah, and they have puzzled looks on their faces. They are looking at her, right? Yes, there are also cars and traffic. Good. So the people, the businessmen are looking at her. What is Lee doing? Yes, good. Standing with her arms out and her feet together. All right. Okay, she's breaking a societal expectation. Okay, I agree with you on that, but that's more like interpretive. Let's think about just specifically what we see that she seems to be doing. Dancing or performing. Yeah, she's doing some kind of movement. It seems like she's stuck. You can kind of tell that if you look here, this side, you can tell it's blurred, like she's moving around a little bit. Yeah, I think this is a good way to put it, Sam, is flailing her arms around, right? Yeah, she's flailing her arms around. Yeah, exactly. Good. So then let's talk about the elephant in the room. So what is she wearing exactly? What do you think? Well, how would you describe what she's wearing? It is a costume for sure. And then you can talk about the medium or the media. There's actually media involved here. Genre, so kind of what kind of costume is it? or style. I think style and genre can get kind of mixed up here. Ooh, okay, yes. Amalgamation of body parts. Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like it's a bunch of different body parts put together. Good. A soft sculpture. Yes, I like that term too. That's a very art historical term. You don't have to use that, but that's a good one. Yeah. Because it's probably made out of fabric of some kind, right? There's multiple arms, has extra limbs, horror vibes. Here we go. Yes, so this goes along kind of between genre and style. It has this kind of horrific or horror feel to it, right? Hodgepodge. Ooh, hodgepodge. I like that word for the style. Maybe it feels very hodgepodge. Good. It resembles an octopus. Yes, like figure. Very good. It could be a mythological figure. You might want to have a specific example of what you think it would be. Good. So let's talk about the actual media. So the medium of this. So fabric, paint, gems, and other things that are glued on. Good. Yeah, textile is fine to say instead of fabric. Jewels, beads, dyed red and green. Right. Make sure you do talk about the media specifically. You'll notice like in Horlick's chapter, a lot of things are just labeled mixed media. And if you go to a museum, you'll often see that. I absolutely hate that. I'm like, mixed media tells you nothing about, really, it tells you nothing about the actual piece. So luckily Horlick, I think, does explain what all has been used in this. But yeah, it could be used for practical effects in a horror movie. I think so too. It'd make a really fun B horror movie, you know? Surrealism. Yeah, you could compare it to surrealism in some different ways, right? Definitely has some aspects. Surrealism and horror are definitely related to each other. Good. It looks like it could be uncomfortable. Very good. Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's heavy. Yeah, it seems like it's a lot of fabric. It's stuffed. It's stuffed with I think it's stuffed with that like spongy material that you usually stuff with. Sometimes couches and things are stuffed with that. That can get kind of, it's lightweight, but I don't know if that can get heavy. Good. Uncanny Valley. Oh gosh, am I gonna date? I don't know the new lingo of Uncanny Valley. It sounds familiar though to me. But yes, if you can explain what Uncanny Valley is, then you can use that. Good. So yeah, I think we got a lot of good adjectives to describe it. So there's kind of these two aspects, right, to describe to a performance art piece, right? So what's happening, what's being done, but then also it could be the visual art part, which is more like what they're wearing or how they've dressed themselves up, right? Oh, humanoid, but not quite. Okay, there we go. Yeah. All right. I've seen this term before. Yeah. Oh, very good then. Yeah, you can definitely use that term to describe this, right? Very good. All right, so interpret. So what do we think is Ippur's message exactly with doing this, wearing this costume and going out in public and running around? Do you think that it gets across to the audience based on what you've read and what you can see in the photographs? And how does it connect? Let's start with those two first. What's her message and do you think it's getting across? Or how would you react or respond if you were someone in the street who saw this happening? Let's see. There's no right or wrong answer, as you can tell. Okay. Yeah, unapologetic about her individual identity, which is vastly out of the norm. Yeah. Okay, so commenting on her individual identity, um, our sense of individualism, maybe. Yeah, okay. Subverting traditional norms in a capitalist world of businessmen. Very good. I think that's a good way to put it because, right, she's really challenging the ideas of what is supposed to be normal within the realms of the realm that the businessmen inhabit, right, which is this capital with this corporate capitalism, right? And she's definitely juxtaposing that for sure. Yeah, this is also true just to get some kind of reaction or attention from people, right? She just wants to provoke people. That's definitely a possibility here, right? Good. And then, yeah, and this is what, and Horlick talks about that one, and she also talks about this one particularly, right, that Alex says here. Breaking social norms about how women should look slash act in Korea by being outspoken and unladylike. Yeah, that's definitely, that's not just a part of this performance art piece that Ipur has done, but that's a consistent part of her performance art, which I'll show you in a moment. She's definitely very interested in subverting what is the so-called traditional role of women. And she does so by, as herself being assigned female at birth and identifying, and she is a woman, identifies as a woman, and she uses her body and makes it up and uses it to do different things to challenge what is seen as normal for women. Good. Yeah, her individuality compared to gender norms. Very good. Yes, good. Grab audience attention, exaggerate individuality. Good. Okay, here we go. Uncomfortable. You might be uncomfortable, right? If you see this. I think it definitely would make me confused for sure. And that's definitely part of her goal. Yeah, exactly. Her goal is to make you uncomfortable about the fact that she's there, right? Good. Confused, unsettled. Yeah, unsettled. You might be like, I don't really know I don't know what to think about this piece, right? Would you go watch? Would you go up and like these people seem to be swarming around her here in this photograph. In the previous photograph, they didn't really seem to be doing that. But would you go watch her? Would you talk to her? Good. Yeah, I would go watch her. I would definitely swarm around and like look for sure. I just find the outfit very intriguing, right? Good. So how does it connect to the past? I'd be too afraid to talk to her in the outfit. Yeah, it's definitely not for everyone. I'm not suggesting that everyone should have that kind of outgoing personality, but I would definitely personally be interested in doing that. Yeah, but being nervous, I think good. Yeah. So how does it connect to the past? So it's disruptive, which is like Minjung art. Very good. Yes, it's disruptive. It is disruptive, right? So we didn't really talk too much about the actual art made um during protests. Well, I mean, my Professor Stiller did in her talk, and I think Gabe did, or yeah, Gabriel did too in his talk, right? So it's disruptive, right? So it's like Minjung art, especially the art of protest, right? It's meant to disrupt the quote unquote peace that's going on or the normal way that society is supposed to flow, right? Very good. Yeah, so it does connect to the past, or it's similar in that way. And it comments on a social or political issue. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, and grab people's attention, get people talking, people to respond. But how does it connect to like tradition then? I think is it on no, okay. Yeah, here we go. How does that connect to tradition then? So it definitely is similar to Minjung art, but let's think even more to things that we think of. For example, something like Goryeo Celadon, what we talked about last week, or the idea of Korean art being a certain way. How does this challenge or how does this connect or disconnect from that version of past art in Korea that we talked about last week? We'll go back to this question. What do you think? What is the relationship between this kind of art and the quote unquote traditional Korean art that we looked at last week? Okay, good. Yes, we're getting there. Yeah, so Gabby, it gets it's against the norm. Yeah. So notice how her art is against the norm, right? she's not really bringing in what you would consider quote unquote traditional art, right? Because she's supposed to be divisive, yeah. And it challenges the idea of what Korean art is supposed to be, yeah, for sure. It's not typical fine arts. And it seemed to have bold, bright color scheme, yeah, for sure, right? Yeah, exactly. So in content, it's different and in medium, right? So what's considered traditional art is not really performance art, right? And it doesn't really look like this either. So in its style, right? So yes, it's definitely similar to like Minjung art, but then when we think of what is called this idea of traditional Korean art, it is more so challenging that notion of what art can be. Does that make sense? Do we see that? Okay. Yeah, I'm only asking that because you're probably going to be asked that question again. And then I think the easiest way to make that argument, right, is you think about the way she is actually challenging the traditional role of women or the traditional role of the really just what is considered normal in society, right? Or the traditional role of the artist, right? As someone who's supposed to be away from their artwork. And yeah, so she continues to, or she continued to do a lot of this. So she has, this is actually my favorite piece by her at all, which is called Abortion, in 1989, because Ipur actually underwent an abortion in South Korea prior to this, and this was her way of performing her experience and reproducing it to bring acknowledgement to this facet of being a woman in South Korea, particularly. So you see how she's still challenging this idea of what women are supposed to do and act and be and say, right? But then she also actually has artwork connected, like we were talking about, to the Minjung movement as well. So this is actually an installation piece here. It's kind of like a sculpture, and it is the tub that I don't think we got to learn about him when we did Minjung art, but it is a recreation of the tub that the student named Park Jong-chul was waterboarded to death in prior in 1987 before which led to a bunch of demonstrations that actually made the regime decide to have democratic elections. So, oh, there's the question. Yeah, so we talked about this. Sorry. All right. So are there any questions about Ipur before we start talking about Sadoho? So we only have about, what, 20, 25 minutes? Good. All right. So Sadoho, let's move over to Sadoho here. So what kind of art, how would you explain the kind of art that Sadoho makes? What are some things you would say about it? So it's interactive. Yes, absolutely. It's immersive for sure. Very good terms. Yeah. Installation. Yes, they are installation art. So we'll unpack that in a minute. It's personal. Yes, it is definitely personal to him, right? Large scale. Yeah, they tend to be larger. I don't think I have seen some. He actually has some fabric furniture sculptures that are smaller than what we've seen here, but yeah, they tend to be large. Mixed traditional and contemporary art styles. Yes, very good. You're on the right track there with our conversation. So yeah, installation art. So what does that mean? How would you define installation art? So all art is installed into a space at some point, right? But installation art has a specific thing about that. It has a specific relationship to the space. Yes, very good. It's meant to be in a specific space. So installation art tends to be made for a specific, you pick a space and then you make an artwork specifically for it, which is essentially what I just said, but just to really drive it in there. And kind of by nature, what Sam says here, they tend to allow audience direct interaction with it. Rather than like observing it, right? Usually it has more of an interactive take to it. Not always, but it tends to. Good. You can also say sculpture, which is more familiar, right? Multimedia, in the way that it just has a lot of different media going into it, which we're going to talk about. And then this is kind of the term that a lot of people use specifically for Sodoho is fabric architecture, right? Because he's recreating these architectural pieces, or I mean, these buildings, these gates, these rooms with fabric. So let's talk about gate. So this was in the video about the Seattle Art Museum, where remember they have the gate, and then they have a video that they play over it, right? So let's describe, what are things that you would say, what is the material or the different media involved in this artwork gate? And how would you explain like other descriptive elements of it, its size, the composition, the style, everything that's going into it here? What are some things you would say to describe it? Good. Okay, so lightweight fabric, yes. And it's lifelike, yes. And so it seems very realistic on one hand, right? Yeah. The gate is made out of fabric. Good. And then there's the screen with a projection on it. Yeah, and that's animated. Yeah, projected video. Very good. Yeah, students tend to forget the video part of this, but this actually has not only the gate, but also the projected video. And that's part of the medium, right? Or the media used here. Yes, with the video being projected on it. Good. Exactly. So what kind of art, or what genre or type of art would you call this? Good. It's sculpture made out of, yes, textile. The sculpture made out of textile. It has one central focus, and the screen being more subtle. Yes, very good. Yeah, good. Talking about the composition here. So we have the gate is in the center, right? And then the video is actually projected onto this screen, this kind of drop down. You used to have these. I don't know if they had these when you guys were in primary, secondary, and high school and whatnot, but they pull down the overhead screens and you would project something onto it. That's what this is basically, right? It's that projection screen, which is around it. Good. Yeah, so it's interactive. Yeah, absolutely. What are people doing with the gate? What does it seem like, at least based on this photograph? And I think you see people in the video doing this. What are they doing? They're walking through it. Yes, they get to walk through it like an actual gate or an actual door, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they're allowed to do that, and they get to have a lot of different viewing experiences, right? Because they're able to do that. Good. So then what's the narrative going on about gate, particularly in the video? What are things that they talk about in the video for Saw? What is he saying about this artwork? Where does this gate come from? Do you remember? His childhood home. Yes, his childhood home. Very good. Yeah, so this is a reproduction of the gate that was in front of his home as a kid, right? So he was interested in combining that with these video projections. Why? Why was his motivation to incorporate the video projections? Let's look at so these are some of the artworks, or this is one of the artworks that he uses in the video projection. What is he interested in doing? You know what? It doesn't have to be from the video. What do you think? Why do you think he would do that? Why would he reproduce his childhood home as a fabric architecture, but then want to put this kind of art particularly projected around it? What do you think? Why might you do that? Yeah, okay, so that's a possibility, right? Here we go. Yeah. That's a possibility, Athena. So connection between his personal history and then his personal history, particularly in a quote unquote traditional Korean home, right? And the wider history of Korean art, right? Or traditional, what we view as traditional art. Yeah, good. Identifying his cultural heritage. Yeah, so he's making a statement about what he is inherit what kind of art from the past he feels he inherits, right? Good. Yes, and all of this comes back to his childhood, right? And remembering growing up where he grew up in Seoul. Yeah, and then it also prompts viewers to make connections, absolutely, between his artwork and then the artwork that's also in the collection, right? So remember, these artworks are actually from the Seattle Art Museum collection. And then there's this one here too, but this one's kind of different. So this one is for sure, though. So this one is Joseon, right? 19th century Joseon. This is Edo period. What's Edo period? Is Edo period Korea or something else? Does anyone know? Yeah, Edo period is Japanese. Edo period is Japan. So why would he include this one in the projection if it was all about his identity? What do you think as a Korean person? Or do you think that this problematizes? Maybe to comment on the history between the two countries? Yeah, maybe. What else? There's something particular he says in the video. Occupation of Korea, maybe. Edo period isn't really related to the occupation of Korea, though. It's more like Meiji period, which is after. So did you notice he had a particular philosophy about quote unquote Asian art? Do you remember him talking about this? Um, here we go. Yeah, okay. Amelia, yes. Commenting on what American assumes to be Asian culture. Yeah. So maybe commenting on that, right? So people in the US maybe really associate Asian culture with Japanese art, which I think is overall kind of true. Japan and China particularly. So maybe by incorporating this and Korean art as well, or Chosun period art, he's commenting on that. Yeah. He has this idea that there's this shared aesthetic among these quote unquote traditional Asian cultures, that there's something shared there. And he says that in the video. And that's what he says is the reason that he wants to, or he used both Chosun and then like Edo period artworks in projecting onto the screen, right? So he's kind of commenting not necessarily on Koreanness only, but also like what they think of as Asianness broadly. Do you see that kind of thing? Maybe if you rewatch the video, you'll pick up on that more. But that's kind of the narrative of the whole thing, is what is Asian art and how he is commenting on that. So let's look at this. So this is the house that it's based on. So in Korean, these kinds of houses are called hanok. So hanok are houses that are made they're typically modern or contemporarily made houses, but they're inspired by pre-modern Korean houses. So people think of hanok as a traditional Korean house, but most of them, almost all, I mean, think about all of the devastation of the Korean Peninsula that we've talked about up till this point. Most of these kinds of houses from the Chosun period were destroyed. Very few were left standing, especially after the Korean War. So what they do is, as kind of a aesthetic fad in a way, they take the aesthetic of Hanok and they remake these houses in the modern or contemporary modern periods in the 20th century and today, to be similar to those things. And so you can see the gate here. And this is kind of what it looks like. It's interesting because it is a house, but actually it's more like a what would you call that? There's multiple buildings and they're all connected by a courtyard. rather than having like one building that is the house. The house is actually made up of multiple complex. Yes, thank you. Yes, it's like a complex, more like. Although it's, well, in this case, it's small scale. You know, in Chosun, the elites had these vast complexes for their homes. And if you've ever gone to Seoul, you go to the palaces are similarly set up in the same way as like a house, or what we call a home. A house would be set up with different buildings being for different purposes. One of the kind of most notable things about these Chosun houses is that there's buildings for men and buildings for women, even if it was inhabited by a married couple. They still stayed in separate buildings. So yeah, this is kind of what it looks like and what he's harking back to. Good. Yeah, so overall, how does he feel about tradition? What is he interested in? What is his take on it? What do you think? Is he for tradition? Is he against tradition? For tradition. Okay, here we go. Yeah, for tradition. Yeah, very good. Yes, he makes that statement, I think, Lindsay, right? Tradition is needed to progress art, right? He says you look back to the past and you take that kind of aesthetic. And for him, he was talking about a quote unquote Asian aesthetic. And that's how we progress art in the present and for the future, right? So he's definitely very pro tradition in the way he approaches his artwork, right? Good. Yeah, so let's talk about this other artwork that showed up. This one was primarily in the longer video, I think. um what do you think about this quote? I always ask students, what we are is all about memories. Do you agree with that? What did you think when Saw said that? What we are is all about memories. Yeah, memories stay with us. They define who we are. Yeah, I think they really are. I really do agree with that in a lot of ways. Yeah, very nostalgic. I know I get very nostalgic too. I think that's why we like art so much, visual art so much. There's a hint of nostalgia in almost every artwork. Yeah, a hard drive of memory. Oh, that's such an interesting way of putting it, Athena. Yeah. Our brains are just kind of hard drives of memory, right? Yeah, and our memory shapes our identity, right? How we remember things is, or what we remember, is very much helps us define who we are in the present. Yeah, our experiences make us who we are. Absolutely. Yeah, and we definitely need the past. I agree. We need the past in order to move forward, right? As long as I live on a memory, I will never die. Yeah, very true, Gabby. Yeah, there's that kind of thing where people say, you know, not to take this in a morbid direction, but people say they're afraid of dying, not because they're afraid of dying, but because they're afraid that they'll be forgotten, right? People fear being forgotten more than they, you know, fear dying, like the physical death itself, right? And you're right, and I think you're right. I think there's a connection there with that idea. Yes, exactly. And yes, very good. And it's not just our specific memories, but our generational, that stuff that's passed on from our caregivers, from our guardians, and even from our peers in our life, our friends and our siblings, right? And the way that we share our stories with each other, and that becomes part of us too, right? These memories that get passed to us. Not necessarily they're our memory, but they're a memory that has been that is given to us, right? By someone. Yeah, that's very important to think about too. So let's keep this in mind and let's think about some of his other works, right? Um, yeah, especially if you It's interesting, like someone who, if you've ever, I've never personally interacted, but seeing what I've seen with people who suffer from dementia, it's very interesting that they do um continue to hold on to certain memories, but not all. And dementia itself is one of the most kind of like heartbreaking things to see someone live through, right? Because, like we're saying here, they essentially lose their sense of self, their sense of identity, and it's quite horrible. So if you or someone you love or someone you know has dealt with that, I'm very sorry for that. Sorry for that loss. So let's keep all of this together though, including memory loss as well. And let's talk about some of his other artworks. So, or let's talk about his artwork in a different way. So we have this here. Maybe we won't focus so much on describing it. But does anyone remember what is this a reproduction of in Sadaho's life? What memory of his does this relate to? You remember from the long video? That's his New York apartment. Yes, this is like the front step and front door of his New York apartment. Exactly. His landlord. Yes, let's talk about that. What kind of relationship did he have with his landlord? What did he say about his landlord? They were very close. Yes. He's very close with him. Yeah, it's a little bit different from what a lot of people, if you're someone like me, you rent from a company. So you have a landlord, but not really. You kind of have more like a land company in a way. But yeah, that relationship, landlord and tenant relationship, can be very sticky. But he seems to have a very rewarding relationship with his landlord, right? Which is a little bit different. And he seems to make that the reason why this was so important to him, right? Yes. Yeah, exactly. So his landlord was really interested in his art, right? And supportive of it, right? Sadaho was very thankful to him for something, for letting Sadaho do something. Do you remember what it was? And that's not what this artwork is particularly about, but there's an artwork in the video that he is actually working on in the footage. Yeah, something that's really crazy, I think, which is covering his studio in paper and rubbing it with their crayons, essentially taking rubbings of it with crayons, right? Yeah, does that really seem like something a regular landlord would probably want to happen in whatever space they're trying to make money off of? Not really, right? Although I'm sure Sodoho is still making sure that his landlord, he's still paying his landlord in some way or somehow, right? So I think that's why Sodoho, has that kind of a very different relationship compared to others. So let's think about this artwork here then. How does it convey memory? How does it convey this memory exactly? And think about that from a descriptive point of view, more so. So what do you see that makes it feel like memory, or makes it, appear as though it's related or trying to convey memory? Good. Yes, the transparency. There's something about how you can look through it, right? It makes it feel distant. Very good. Yes, it makes it feel distant. It's like it's there, but it's also not there. Exactly. Very good. It makes it feel like imagination. Good. Yeah, ghost-like. Good. Vagueness. Stairs are really opaque. Good. Yeah, memories. It brings back memories. Tangible. It's tangible, but also not. Yeah, exactly. Do you also? Oh, there we go. Yeah, Tabitha brought it up. You also notice this, and if you see some of the other architectural pieces that are displayed, they're very rarely displayed on the ground, like Tabitha says here. The stairs don't touch the ground. Everything is lifted up a little bit like it's floating, right? Very good. Yes, the tint of blue, because it's faded, it makes it feel like a memory. Yeah, very good. Yeah, it makes it feel more distant, right? Like you're kind of like you're looking up, like trying to remember what it was, like you can't get it or something. Yeah, exactly. So the way it's displayed, the way it's hung, it's hung is very important to that too. Very good. So what are some differences and similarities between door and gate? What are some differences and similarities? It could be descriptive or it could be interpretive, either way, but just to get a couple of them into our conversation here. So the fadedness, yeah, so they both appear transparent. That's very important, right? Exactly. That could be a good descriptive similarity that helps you with the interpretive similarity that they both what? They both are about something. They're both architectural, yes. They're both about a passageway, yes. There we go. Memories. They're both about memories. Um, so he was an adult when he lived in the New York apartment, but he was a young adult, right? Or he was younger. It was still in his past. So, but still memory. Yeah, exactly. So they're both about memory. Architecture, yeah. So the fact that they're both architecture descriptive, that's kind of descriptive, right? Brings us to the similarity interpretively that they're both about his memory of something, of what, of where what. His memory of where what? Home. Yes, his memory of home, where he lived, where he called home for certain amounts of time in his life. Exactly. Good. Yeah, let's talk about that. They're both well, we have a little bit of time, yeah, and they're both passageways, right? They're both like just the door, the entrance or the gate into that home. Exactly. Very good. So Sodoho and Ipur, how do their interpretations, or let's just say their relationships with tradition, how are they similar or different from each other? What do you think? How is their idea, the way that Ipur versus Sodoho approach or deal with the idea of tradition, how do they compare? It can be pretty obvious. And yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so Sodoho is definitely more open to embracing tradition than Ipur seems to be, right? Yeah, very good, Athena. Tradition seems to be uplifting for Saul, but not so much for Lee, right? Not so much for E. But they do have both have their own meaning for tradition. They are both still interested in it, for sure. Yeah, exactly. So Saz is more seen as positive, whereas E takes more of a negative relationship, right? So Sa is trying to um, use his work to incorporate tradition, whereas E and bring acknowledgement to tradition, whereas Lee is definitely more concerned with challenging tradition, right? Yes, good. Value tradition versus break tradition. That's a very good way to put it. Yes, let's see. Yeah. Do you think that Saw makes any social or political? So Lee, obviously, as we discussed, is making a comment or talking about social issues. Do you think Saw is talking about social issues at all? What do you think? My answer would be yes, I think so, but I don't really know how to explain it because I think he's more dealing with the issue of the human condition in a lot of ways. And the human condition is social. And I think a lot of people are concerned with memory, like we've already discussed with his quote, all we are is the memories, right? But there's not really something political that can be done about it in the same way that what Lee is talking about. There can be policies put in place that can definitely affect what Lee is talking about with the position of women in society, right? So it's a little bit tricky. I think the answer is yes to both, but in extremely different ways. Yeah. Yeah, good. And Yes, and for Saab, the social issue of the perception of Asian, right? What is Asian, right? Dealing with this, that's definitely a huge social issue for sure. I'm in an Asian American art class, well, seminar right now, right? And we're talking about this term and Korean and Japanese and, Indian. What does that mean, right? Sorry, I will sometimes say ipur because in Korean it's just e, but if you say Lee, you can say Lee as well. But in Korean it's not said with an L. Sorry. But Lee bur or e bur is both fine. So you can say Lee or e. Yeah, and Saw is obviously not as bold in his statements. Good. All right. So we have 1 minute left. So the prompt for the plenary response is very big, but it's essentially what you've been doing. So you're going to pick two artworks from that Charlotte Horlick introduces in her chapter that we read. But it can't be the ones we discussed in class. So I think the only one we discussed in class is actually Sorry for Your Suffering. Unfortunately, you can't talk about Sorry for Your Suffering, but you can pick, if you want to talk about Ipur, you can still talk about Majestic Splendor. If you want to talk about Sadoho, you can still talk about the dog tags or the the other artwork she talks about. You're going to do a comparative and visual analysis of them. So comparatively describe them with attention to their similarities and differences in media, genre, style. And also think about the way the viewers interact with them, what kind of art it is, how it's installed, things like that we've talked about today. And then comparatively interpret how the artworks relate to the idea of tradition. Are they for or against tradition? And what are your reasoning for each? Yes, it's 7:15, so you can go if you want. You may want to pick one that is for and one that's against, or you might want to, if you pick two and they think they're both for it or they're both against it, consider how they similarly and differently express that relationship, and include at least one reference to what Horlick says about the artwork, the two artworks, okay? So, good. So thank you all so much for sticking through with me. If you have any questions, I'm here. You can talk to me. Otherwise, I will finish grading your blogs tonight and everything, and your attendance as well. Thank you. This is last